What if I told you that it was possible to leave an argument feeling calm, relieved, and like you'd just had a successful, productive conversation? By the end of this video, I'm going to tell you 3 things that you can do in order to turn arguments into successful, productive conversations. I help my clients figure out how to stop having the same communication problems over and over again. And I've spent the last decade or so of my career figuring out how to delicately but successfully say hard things. So, successful conflict resolution or having a successful argument, disagreement, heated discussion has a number of different elements, but essentially it consists of emotionally intelligent fighting. And that I found tends to have 3 components. The first one is you need to have some guidelines or guardrails in place for how you're going to have this heated discussion, right? How are you going to have an argument? The second piece of the puzzle is having a process for how you have heated discussions or arguments. And the third piece of the puzzle is you enabling yourself or you being able to show up as your best self during these discussions. So now let's get into part 1, having guidelines or guardrails in place for your argument or your heated discussion. So the first component of this is that you want to ensure that you are discussing the one issue with specificity and not using vague generalizations. So, what do I mean by that? If you come to your partner and say you want to discuss the fact that you would like them to help you clean up the kitchen and tidy it up during weeknights after dinner, that is the one issue that you need to ensure that you are discussing. And you need to provide them with some examples of what you mean, right? So, you could say something like, last Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I noticed that after I made dinner and we put the kids down for bed, I asked you to help me clean up the kitchen. And on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights, you didn't end up helping me clean up the kitchen, right? That is one specific concrete issue with examples. Last Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night, you asked for their help tidying up the kitchen and you didn't get the help that you'd asked for. So that's the first piece, right? You want to have a specific issue that you want to discuss, and you want to have concrete examples of that issue or the problem or the thing, and not just use vague generalizations. And then you don't want to bring up unrelated issues. If you say you want to discuss tidying up the kitchen during weeknights after dinner, stick to that particular issue. You don't want to bring up anything else like laundry or getting the kids off to school in the morning or any other issues that might also need to be addressed. You want to make sure you're sticking to the one issue that you've brought up. Now, you might run into a situation where you say you want to talk about the dishes and tidying up after dinner, but then your partner brings up some unrelated issue that maybe they also want to discuss. You don't want to just completely disregard their issue altogether, but you can say something along the lines of, like, I understand that you want to discuss the laundry, but right now I'd like to finish talking about tidying up the kitchen after dinner. We can come back to a discussion about the laundry at another particular time, but can we finish discussing the issue that I brought up, right? So you want to stick to the same issue. If your partner brings up something unrelated, you can redirect them back to the issue that you want to discuss. And you also want to make sure that you yourself aren't bringing up other unrelated issues that might be percolating in your brain, but that you stick to the one issue that you said you want to discuss. And then and this can be really, really difficult, and sometimes this is really, really hard. You don't want to deliberately say things that will hurt the other person. So, this is part of the guardrails that you want to have in place when you're having difficult discussions, because if you are getting frustrated, if you're getting heated, if you are feeling like you're not getting through to your partner, and that might prompt you to want to say something that you is going to hurt them, maybe because you feel like you're not being heard, maybe because you feel like they're deliberately mishearing you. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But for right now, with respect to the guidelines and the guardrails that you're going to have in place for when you want to have discuss a particularly sensitive issue or maybe have a discussion that could turn heated, you want to ensure that you are not saying things that you're going to deliberately hurt the other person. And then we come to part 2, which is having a process. Now, what do I mean when I say having a process? You want to, as part of the discussion that you're having, you want to encourage the other person to tell you what they've got on their mind, to tell you what might be wrong, what they might be thinking about. This is part of the process that you're going to have for the discussion itself. So you bring up the issue that you want to talk about, which is tidying up the kitchen during weeknights after dinner, and you lay out the thing that you would like help with, or that you have these specific examples of last Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday when they didn't help you, but you asked. You want to then ask them for their thoughts, right, on the situation. You don't just want to talk at them. You want to bring up your issue, explain what it is, have concrete examples, stick to that one issue, and then you want to ask them for their thoughts, ask them what they think, and see what was going on in their minds and see what was percolating, right? Maybe they'd had some particularly bad things come up at work. Maybe one of their friends was going through something really awful and their mind was just elsewhere, right? You want to ask them what was going on for them with respect to this particular issue that you've just brought up. And as part of asking them what was going on with them, you want to listen to their answers. And then if you're not quite sure what they meant when they said something, or if you don't quite understand a point that they've made, you then want to ask clarifying questions. Part of the process that I'm talking about is if you don't understand something, if you need more clarity, if you're just unsure of exactly what they meant when they said something, ask a clarifying question in order to make sure that you are understanding what they are saying, right? You want to ensure that you are articulating your point clearly, but you also then want to ensure that you are understanding whatever it is that they're saying back to you, right? So asking these clarifying questions can just help increase your understanding of the situation. It will also likely signal to them that you want to understand their point of view, right? That you are looking for a solution to the problem and you're not just looking to win an argument. And then after you've asked clarifying questions, you want to confirm that you understood what they said, right? They might have said something, you weren't quite sure what it meant, you asked your clarifying question. After they've answered your clarifying question, then you confirm, maybe by either restating what they said or saying something along the lines of, okay, just to make sure I understand what you're saying, you said blah, right? You want to confirm that you actually understood what they said. And then all of this, like having this process, is ensuring that you're working towards a win-win for both of you. You want to ensure that you come up with a way forward for getting the help that you are asking for in terms of tidying up after dinner. But you also want to ensure that whatever solution, agreement that you all come up with is a win-win for both you and, in this case, your partner. All right. Then we get to step 3. Step 3 is making sure that you are showing up as your best self during this potentially heated discussion. You want to be aware of your own emotions, okay? So maybe you work on ensuring that when you bring this up, right, when you attempt to have this discussion, that you're in a pretty decent place, right? You're not trying to have this discussion after you are already a little bit heated and a little bit activated from them not having helped you tidy up after dinner. So you want to be aware of how you are showing up to the conversation. You also want to be aware of the other person's emotions too, right? So maybe timing this when you bring this up or when you have this discussion, and ensuring that you're not asking them to talk about this particular thing right after they've come in from, I don't know, having a particularly heated discussion with a friend or a relative, or after they like have just walked in from a particularly seemingly exhausting day at work. You want to be aware not only of your emotions and sort of what you are bringing to the table in the particular moment when you're trying to have this conversation. You also want to be aware of the other person's emotions too, both right before you start having the discussion, but also during the discussion as well, right? Because if you are aware of your own emotions, and you're aware of when you're getting heated and when you're getting triggered and when the thing might slip out of your mouth that will hurt them, but you want to ensure that it doesn't slip out of your mouth, then you can say, okay, even if it's just internally to yourself, I'm getting a little heated. So you can say, okay, like maybe I need to take 5, like, or maybe you need to stop and take some deep breaths. Or if the other person is getting super activated, you can offer to them, hey, it seems like this is just kind of going off the rails. Do we want to take a minute and then just like take a minute to get our bearings, maybe walk in the other room and then come back to it after a minute or 2 or 5? You want to be aware of not only your emotions, but the other person's emotions too. And you want to make sure that you are communicating your needs as clearly as you can. And this includes your body language too, right? Communication, I think I read a statistic once that said communication is roughly 7% the actual words that you use, something like 20 something percent your body language and your gestures, and then 55%, what was it? 20% the words. Oh, no, it was 7% the actual words, 20 something percent the tone, and like 55% nonverbal cues. So your body language, your gestures, those aspects of communication that are not actually the words coming out of our mouths. So part of making sure you're showing up as your best self is you being able to communicate your needs clearly and being aware of not just the words that are coming out of your mouth, but the tone of the words that you are using and your body language as well, so that you are communicating what you want to communicate with your whole body. And you want to make sure that the priority that you have coming into this discussion is finding a win-win for the both of you, right? You want to get your particular problem addressed. In this case, it's tidying up after dinner on weeknights. But you also want to make sure that whatever it is that you decide is actually a win-win for you and, in this case, your partner whom you're asking to contribute or to do this particular thing, right? You want to come at this with the mindset of not winning in terms of getting exactly what you want. Pardon me. That can be part of it, right? But you also want to come into this trying to find a win-win for the both of you. So those are the 3 things, right? You want to make sure that you have some guidelines and some guardrails in place for when you're going to have these heated discussions. You want to make sure you have a process for how you're going to have these discussions, and you want to make sure you're showing up as your best self for these discussions. So those are the 3 things that I said I was going to talk to you about in this video. There's a 4th element, right? But this 4th element is not something that you necessarily have control over, right? So this whole video is how you can turn an argument into a successful, productive conversation. And I've just given you 3 things that you can do. The 4th element, the 4th piece of this puzzle is the other person, right? Is the other person that you are having this discussion with. I didn't forget about them. They're an integral, very, very important part of having a successful, productive conversation. Now, the 4th element, this other person. Hopefully, this other person is also showing up to this conversation in a way where they want to find a win-win for the both of you. However, there are instances where the other person might not show up as their best self. What do I mean by this? They might not be willing or, in some cases, able to recognize issues that are important to you. Okay? So that particular issue, if somebody is unwilling or unable to recognize issues that are important to you, hopefully part of this discussion that you're having is you explaining to them why this particular issue is important to you, right? You are communicating clearly why the thing that you are bringing up is important to you and why you've brought it up in the first place. And then even if they don't get it initially, they will work to try and understand and ask their own questions for clarity and increased understanding why this particular issue matters to you so much. Okay? So they need to, if they don't understand at the outset why you're bringing up this particular thing, they need to ask questions, listen, and try and understand why this thing is important to you. If they do not do that, that is a problem. All right. So the second thing, if the other person gets defensive or gets angry or gets loud when you attempt to bring up this particular issue and you have brought up this particular issue in a kind, calm, sort of straightforward way. You don't come at them yelling and screaming, because if somebody comes at me yelling and screaming, like, it's going to take a whole lot for me not to give them back the same energy, right? It's going to take a big effort on my part for me not to be defensive if somebody comes at me seemingly out of the blue yelling, or with, comes at me just like having already being activated, right? So if you come to them and you are calm and kind and clear and you say you want to have this discussion, and then right off the bat they get angry, they get defensive, this is a problem. And so the things that you can do are, you can attempt to either redirect, or you can just say, oh, maybe this isn't the best time for us to talk about this particular issue. Can you let me know when you want to talk about X, Y, and Z? And then you all figure out a particular time to then revisit the discussion, right? Them getting angry and getting defensive doesn't mean that you never get to have this discussion. That's not the answer here. But if they get angry or defensive the first time you bring it up, or right when you bring it up, you can then say, now's not the best time. Let's figure out a good time to have this discussion. When do you want to have it? And then figure out a time later to have that discussion. There might also be instances where you bring something up, they get angry and defensive, and you just say, okay, we're not going to talk about this right now. And then you leave that be, and then you bring it up at a later date without figuring that particular date out, right? There might be instances where, okay, you can't have that discussion right then, and you need to figure out when you're going to bring it up again. That is not ideal. However, that is a potential option. Okay. And let's see what else. Okay. If the other person is unwilling to talk to you, you're not able to make them talk to you, right? Now, everybody has bad days. Everybody has times when they are just not up for a heavy, potentially heated discussion about maybe something really sensitive. That is okay. However, if there is a pattern of the other person consistently not being available for you to have serious discussions in a calm, kind, collected way, that's a potentially bigger issue. And that is something that can be addressed in another video. But for the purposes of this particular video, if you have the guardrails and the guidelines in place for how you're going to have heated discussions, you have a process for how you're going to have heated discussions, and you show up as best you can for this particularly heated discussion, those are the components, those are the three things that you can do to help turn an argument into a successful, productive conversation. We've identified the fact that there is a fourth element to this, the other person who is involved, and them also being capable, able, and willing to show up to have this discussion in a calm, kind way. But those are the three things that you can do in order to turn arguments into successful, productive discussions. All right, so those are the three things. If you've got questions or you've got comments, right? If you're just like, if one of those things that I mentioned, you were like, oh, wait, but what about X? But what about Y? For any of those three parts, drop the question in the comments below. I will happily take a look at it and then figure out how to address that in an upcoming video. If you'd like to work with me one-on-one to focus on any particular areas of communication, you can also drop a comment down below the video. I will then reach out to you with ways that you can work with me one-on-one. I hope this was helpful, and here's to having more effective, productive conversations and communication.